Hey y'all, Craig. Well, it's cooled off in South Carolina. The funniest comment I've heard so far was it's gone from 90 to 55 like it saw a state trooper. It really did cool down. It's warming back up a little bit now, but man, it makes such a difference. It makes you feel like you could go outside and do something other than cut grass. And it's been a year of cutting grass and rain, and it's been quite a year. Anyway, with the passing away of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, law has come up as the subject grand, and thought that'd be a good thing to talk about. So let's talk about it. So, our own Attorney General, Barr, has said that the foundation of all human progress is the rule of law. And I think that's a pretty fair way of putting it because, until we agree that there's rules, that, one, obviously, you shouldn't murder me. Maybe you shouldn't take my stuff. Maybe you shouldn't burn down my hut. Things like that. Once we establish those basic rules, we've got a society. We have an agreement. And in this country, of course, we've got an agreement. The country agrees through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights how it'll treat us. And in return, we agree to a certain set of laws. And the laws probably started off simple enough, but it's become so complicated that now you have to have an advocate, a lawyer, to help you navigate your way through them. If you get in some sort of trouble, or if there's something that you need to have done that requires the legal process, it's become too complicated for the basic layperson to write out a contract to do these things. And I don't quite understand why that's the case. If you've ever read a legal document, we all have. If you buy a new phone, or if you get an update, you have to agree to their contract. But who reads that stuff? I'm sure lawyers do. Some of them do. Just because stay sharp on it. But it's a bunch of gobbledygook. It doesn't just say, hey, we agree to this, you do this. In language that's brief and concise and easy to understand. It seems like they always go as far away from easy to understand as possible. And in a lot of respects, that's where we wound up as far as how our law works. And, with RGB being out of the RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I never get her initials right. I don't know why. But with her out of the picture now, she was a very progressive Supreme Justice. The left is panicked at this point because she was a real champion of special rights, I'll say. And let me explain myself. Why do I call it special rights? Well, if you were to look at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it's very specific in that most rights go to the individual. Outside of the basic laws, the individual is supreme. But, if you've dealt with the court at all, you realize at this point that the individual is more subservient now to the government than before. We're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But it sure seems, especially with press and politics involved, that somebody could just accuse you of something horrible, and even though it's ridiculous and nobody that knows you believes that you would do something like that, people who don't know you don't know the difference. And the thing is, once you accuse somebody of something, that sticks. It's really hard to wipe that away. And people have learned that, and they've also learned that, hey, there's ways to accuse somebody of something and then get you so tangled up in the legal process that, by the time you finally extricate yourself from it, it's been years and no one cares and everything's moved on. You see that with impeachment with Trump. They were never specific about what he did illegally. It moved, right? It was all kinds of things. That's the problem. When you have, especially in Congress, in the House, if you've got somebody accusing you of whatever, good luck trying to get out from under it. And through Trump's presidency, that's been what we've been watching. He's been fighting one accusation after another, and it's a shame because how do you get any work done that way? It's amazing that Trump has achieved so much when he has been under attack relentlessly from the very beginning. So how do we get to that point? How do we wind up where the law is so confusing and where, judges can make special rulings? And I think it's important to understand, it's what I call the progressives trying to progress us past the Constitution. The efforts have been basically to move us away from that very simple Bill of Rights, Constitution, the very simple contract that we had, and make it more and more complicated. So when you consider the abolition of slavery or women's suffrage or you name it, really there was a context for any of those laws in the original structure. It was open enough to interpretation that it would allow more freedoms. It was forged to allow the individual to pursue their goals without government interfering. So basically, if you didn't break the law, you were free to pursue whatever it was you were trying to do, invent the next great thing, or create whatever kind of art, whichever. It's interesting when you think about it. There's some of this stuff that's so tricky. First Amendment rights, especially. Free speech. That's one of those things where that means that somebody can say something that you don't like, that you don't agree with, something that's disgusting, but they have every right to say it. We can't just tell them, hey, shut up. You can walk away. If they're disturbing the peace at the wrong time, in the wrong place, if they're breaking a law, maybe you can quiet them down. But they have every right to say it. But you have every right to say your piece. So, what we're accustomed to seeing now is, let's say something like Black Lives Matter. If they're having a demonstration downtown, and they're calling for, less police or some sort of grievance that has to be reconciled. And, if you show up and tell them you're wrong, they probably won't be respectful and let you say your piece. We've seen this over and over. They can say whatever they want. You may not. And, you see so much corporate money and stuff flowing to Black Lives Matter or, maybe Antifa or some of these other radical groups. And you wonder, what is it that you're supporting here? You're supporting a very one-sided argument that doesn't allow the other side to speak. It would seem more fear and intimidation maybe than actual support. Hey, if we give you a donation, maybe you'll leave us alone and we can go about our business. That kind of thing. But, you would think that, well, there's laws, right? At a certain point, yeah, you can say what you want, but at the point where you start to pick things up and throw them and break windows or hurt people, now you're breaking the law. That's a whole different thing, right? But you're seeing people breaking the law and not getting in trouble. Or if they get in trouble, they're just released right out the back door of the jail, right? You're seeing a a lot of these local district attorneys in these areas where a lot of this looting and rioting is going on, they're extremely progressive, and they feel like, no, we're not going to lock those people up. We're going to let them go because they're just expressing themselves. So, it's the special laws, special rights. Now, like I said, that's not how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be universal. If you live in this country and you're a citizen and you're not breaking the laws, you've got the same rights as anybody else. No less, no more. But what we've seen is this weird tendency for the progressives to find a small group with grievances, whatever they are, right? And some very legitimate, some kind of strange, but grievances. And what they've done is they've become very specific about, well, this is your culture, and your culture should be protected. And so we're not going to hold you liable for the laws that you're breaking because you're kind of in a special category. And that just it seems like you're trying to help somebody, but are you really? I mean, when you break somebody away from the pack and say, well, you've got special circumstances and special needs, and so we're going to ignore some of these laws, or maybe we'll even make up some new laws that'll benefit you and your special circumstance. Well, that's not fair to all the rest of us, right? It's supposed to be universal. All of us live under the same rules and conditions. So when you start to call out those special little categories, you're taking something away from the rest of us, and maybe you're sort of taking something away from the special people, right? You're basically saying that, well, you're not capable of working your way through normal society, that we're going to have to give you a special hand. And I just don't think that's fair. First off, if somebody feels that strongly about something, they'll figure out a way. And if they can be recognized and create a special circumstance for themselves without breaking any laws, cool. A lot of people do that for different reasons. Sometimes it's a business, sometimes it's some charitable organization. There's good reasons to do that. But when you do it kind of writ large, like what we're doing these days more and more, I start feeling like, we're messing something up here. And so Ginsburg's a good example. She came in, very hardworking woman, exceptional, fascinating life. And somebody you should be proud of, a good American. But her emphasis was, she was a progressive. And so to her, certain women's rights were really paramount to her. And so, she was one of the big forces behind women's right to choose, and the women's lib movement, things like that. And I guess I'm to the right of that. I'm not a woman, so I don't even want to step into that. That's got to be one of the toughest decisions of all, to terminate a pregnancy one way or another. I won't even pretend to, know what I'm talking about there. And Ginsburg, she had kids, grandkids, and all that, so I think that she really understood a lot about it. But did women really need special rights to be recognized? They said, well, we need equal pay, or we need equal access to business. Well, I don't know if that's been restricted. And understood, hold it. We've got evidence to the contrary here. I understand that to a certain degree, but in modern times, and given, all due respect to what's happening and how we got to modern times, I just wonder sometimes if, by creating these special categories again, well, now you have to have so many women, you have to pay them this. Our needs are different. Sometimes it used to be, of course, more often than not, the man would be the breadwinner. He would go out and secure the job that had the best income. The wife would maybe stay home and raise the kids, or maybe raise the kids but also work. But a lot of times the woman would have a more flexible schedule in order to take care of the kids more than the man. That's not always the case, though. I've certainly known throughout my whole life women who worked more than the man. I mean, that's just a scenario, but it didn't mean that that was the only way. The point is this: if we don't leave things flexible, then we're really taking things away. So if we say you have to pay the women exactly the same as you pay the men, well, that means then you have to have the same expectations. Now, does that always work? Do all women want that? I mean, it seems reasonable enough to say, well, maybe a lot of women don't. Maybe a lot of women want, well, I want the flexibility, I want the job, but I also want the flexibility to take time away from my family, stuff like that. Should men also have the same? Yes. But these are all things that could be negotiated with the workplace. It's not one of those things that you have to, create a law for. And that's where I have the biggest problem is anytime you create a law for something specifically, that's like the hardest way to get there. As an example, Chicago, all right, some of the toughest gun laws in the country. People get murdered by guns every single day. It's the worst spot in the country. So the gun laws didn't make a difference. Okay, the criminals don't care what the gun laws say, and that's the case all the time. The people who violate the laws the most often typically will keep violating the laws regardless of what you do as far as passing laws go. Now, if you were to crack down on them and say, look, you're breaking the law here and we've had enough of it, but the person breaking the law says, hey, there's a reason I'm breaking it because I've got to do this, and you've created a law that gets in my way of doing this, but I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. Well, you can negotiate at that point, right? And take it up through the courts and say, look, there's a law against this, but I think this law is ridiculous, and let's see if we can't compromise. And that's how things used to work. And of course, when you do that, you got to go through the system, and that's why the system exists. So you do have an advocate sometimes going forward that can put this need in better, clearer words than you can. It used to be. Now it's in the Queen's English or something. But idea being that we have this mechanism through the courts when we have a disagreement with what the law says and what you're trying to do, that we have a way of compromising, getting together and at least trying to find a compromise. But if we don't do that and we just start to pass laws without there's not a compromise, it's just suddenly a new law, it seems more often than not that new law is showing favoritism towards one specific group without that compromise, without looking at everyone else. If you see what I mean, it's using law to carve out a special niche for somebody's need in particular, where it doesn't really do a whole lot of good across the spectrum. And that's the thing. And so as we move through the courts trying to fight these little battles of minutia, if we can't reach an agreement at the most instant level of the courts, it has to move up. And ultimately, of course, the ultimate court in the land in the United States is the Supreme Court. And we've got our 9 justices there who rule on these things that, for some reason or another, they just couldn't reach a satisfaction, throughout the other courts. And so we've got to take it to the highest court in the land and judge this, where I'm saying, look, I need to do this, and there's a law against it, and I want this law changed, something like that. Well, when you get to that level, what's supposed to happen is they're supposed to look at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and make a determination using laws passed and decisions made in the past to compare your needs to what the law allows, and then make a judgment. But again, if you start to carve out special little territories for people that doesn't really apply to everyone else through the highest court in the land, then you're not really getting right down to the core of it. You're splintering off. Instead of saying, "Well, hold it." When we look at the original laws and we compare that, that just doesn't work out for us. And you're going to have to come up with a new way of doing this thing that you want to do. Or yes, when we compare it to the original laws, you really do have the benefit, and that the law is overstepping its boundaries. That's the kind of determination they're supposed to make. But when we get into the higher courts and we start to carve out those special niches, which is really more the job of Congress. The judges are just supposed to interpret the laws, right? They're not supposed to create new ones or create new nuances to the law. They're supposed to be the most conservative, if you will, of the legal minds. They're supposed to say, no, let's get right back down to the nitty gritty. And we lost a lot of that. Ginsburg and other very liberal judges, we see them. They legislate from the bench. They create laws. We've bent over backwards, it seems, to sort of find reasons for new big projects to happen in government. I'm thinking of Obamacare for one, and Justice Roberts. He basically created an excuse for that to occur by turning it into a tax. That's really far, far beyond the scope of what was expected. There's too much temptation already in government to seize the power that people trust in you and manipulate people with it. The mask issue, all this lockdown stuff, that's a good example. Did we go into Congress and vote, and is it a new law that we have all these mandates? No, it was the power with these governors and mayors and people with local jurisdictions. They're the ones that made this happen. And, I'm sure, at least at first, they were doing it, because they thought it was the right thing to do. But, people really should have been asking from the very beginning, is this legal? Is this even American? Do we do this? Are we justified in doing this? Is there enough data here? Are we clear on the science? I heard so many times, the science is settled, which is hilarious because, I've read a lot of the science and it's settled in that, like, masks really don't do much of anything. They make people feel like they're participating. That's really all they do. Social distancing, clean, washing hands, keeping things clean probably helps some. But, again, a virus just does what a virus does. You can't hide from a virus. It just, at this point, I'll bet you there's got to be 20% of the people in the States have had it or come across it one way or another. The numbers are there. It's coming down. But all this has been abused to death. And, I think that it's carving out these special little niches as we've gone through the courts in this land, and these special considerations, and we've just become so willing to disregard the standards of the past and say, well, this is kind of more special circumstance. It's not, it's, even though modern life is certainly different than colonial life, people aren't really any different, right? We're, some of us are real bastards, and some of us are kind-hearted, and some mean well, and some do well. We're people are people. Our basic personality traits are, ancient. So look how look how we're treating each other right now. And, how we're so divided. And how did we get to that point? And I really think that by tearing off these special little circumstances inside of the law and claiming, well, you have special status over here and you have special status. Well, your religion doesn't jive exactly with our laws, but because it's your religion, we'll let you break some of our laws. That's not right. It's like a lot of the Muslims that come in here and they've got Sharia law. That doesn't jive in this country. If you live here, you abide by our rules like all the rest of us. Those special carve-outs don't do us any good. That just creates a lot more tension. And so, as we go through the riots and looting and stuff like this, and the calls for, this race needs special recognition over this race, or these people in this area need this, but these people shouldn't have that. We're getting farther and farther away. The reason we have all those laws in the first place was to keep us from going so far astray, so that we had some place to come back to and say, hold on, we're getting way out of whack here. Let's go back to the guidelines and compare. The guidelines that are supposed to be universal. The Founding Fathers weren't racist. They weren't any of the accusations that you hear these days. What they were a group of people who were experienced. They're people who saw the world for what it was back then. They're people who came through a bunch of different styles of government, all the way from having a king to what have you. And they had the ability to compare all of those styles of the past and sort of formulate this new thing, which is our Constitution, which is our Bill of Rights, which is the United States of America. And it lasted, over 250 years, which is farther than most. But if it's going to last any longer, and it could come apart at the rails right now. But if it's going to last, it needs to get right back to its core mission. It needs to get back to the Constitution. It needs to start to look at some of those little tear-off areas and say, well, maybe we could bring that back into the fold a little bit. Because anytime somebody's considered special, and again, if you're dirt poor and you've got nothing, but you've got special privileges, you're special. Because I don't have those privileges, if you understand what I'm saying. It's that commonality that keeps us all kind of coming back to where we're supposed to be. And so when we're looking at Supreme Court judges, and, obviously Trump right now is looking at somebody who's an originalist, who's very conservative. A couple different ladies come to mind that would be exceptional. It's not, this is the right-wing way to go, all right? It's judges and the courts aren't supposed to be right or left. It's just right in the middle. Follow the old rules, everything will work out fine. Good luck to us, right? But hopefully, we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping that, we'll have a Supreme Court judge, certainly named, but maybe even in office. We'll see. Before the election, so much hinging on this election. Please go vote in person. Make sure your vote counts. And let's hope that we can get back to normal really soon. And thanks for listening. Have a great day.